How likely is Lane Kiffin to go to Florida? We've talked the LSU angle, but Graham Hall will tell us why Gator fans think he is headed to Gainesville. Locked On SEC starts right now.
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Locked On SEC. It's great to have you guys along. I'm Chris Gordy. Thanks for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to our everydayers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Now, the #1 sports podcast network. And a reminder, if you live in Alabama, Louisiana, or Mississippi, you can catch us daily on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. All right, I promise we're going to get into rivalry week talk this week. But for now, we got to talk a little bit more on the Lane Kiffin stuff. I know a lot of people are getting tired of it. Look, we expect an answer by this weekend, and hopefully we can put this whole thing to rest and we'll figure out where he's going. But for now, it remains one of the biggest stories in the SEC. And let's start with his players yesterday taking to social media. Trinidad Chambliss is quarterback. Kewan Lacey is running back, assuring Ole Miss fans that the Rebel players are locked in amid all the Egg Bowl drama and Lane Kiffin. Trinidad Chambliss saying on social media to our fans, the team is completely locked in, living in the moment, staying true to our 1-0 mindset for the Egg Bowl and future games. We are unbothered by anything about next year and fully trusting Coach Kiffin's leadership to keep us moving toward our goals. Now, Kewan Lacey, the running back, he put, despite all the outside distractions, me and my brothers are locked in and committed to finishing what we started with our leader and head coach Lane Kiffin, locked in, focused, and chasing 1-0 every week. Now, I did see Lacey ended up deleting the tweet, so read whatever you want into that. But no doubt, this remains the biggest story in the SEC because of the dominoes that could fall, whether he goes to LSU, whether he goes to Florida, whether he stays put at Ole Miss. And Paul Feinbaum making his appearances yesterday on ESPN, he said the idea a head football coach could not be demonstrative about finishing the season, the playoffs, is just baffling. He said he's been the P.T. Barnum. All he has to say is, I love it here, and I just signed a $30 million extension to stay. Later in the day, Feinbaum appeared on McElroy and Kublik in the morning, and he said Lane Kiffin's prolonged silence and public flirtation with LSU has put the Rebels in an unnecessary, embarrassing position. He said if he ends up staying at Ole Miss, I think he's done that program a disservice by humiliating them through this whole process. So it is kind of an interesting angle. Now, we did hear Kiffin himself spoke to the media on Monday, had his weekly press conference ahead of the Egg Bowl, and it was a little awkward. He sidestepped all the questions about his future, but Kiffin did say, he was asked, how important is it to stay and finish this thing? He said, quote, "It's very important to finish the season. I've never thought of anything different than that." So obviously Lane wants to coach in the Egg Bowl, wants to finish the season. The question is, will he coach them into the postseason as they're projected to make the playoff? Of course, Keith Carter confirmation came on Friday. Lane Kiffin kind of sidestepped any of the comments that his athletic director put out there, but asked about this game and the importance of the state. He said, look, somebody said, I don't know if it's true, that this would be the biggest sporting event in the history of Mississippi. It's a pretty big statement. I actually asked Keith Carter that the other day. He said that would be true. On all the outside noise, Kiffin said, it's not how our players think about this anymore. Makes it a lot easier for them to not listen to the noise because obviously a lot of these guys are only here for a year and then they're all off and doing their own thing. He says, as a fan, the noise is really loud because it's your team, but it's your team for a long time. But for these kids, they don't think that way. It's a product of the system. Yeah, basically, a lot of these kids are like, I'm here for this 1 year. I'm going for a championship run, whether Lane Kiffin coaches me or not. We're going to try to win a national championship. And their ties to Ole Miss, look, they may come back as an alum, they may not. But some of these kids, it's like you're a hired gun. You're a 1-year assassin coming in to play football for Ole Miss. And it's like, no, this is a noise to me. We're just trying to win a championship. I did see Tim Brando made an appearance yesterday on New Orleans radio. He said he thinks Kiffin is staying at Ole Miss. He said he believes he will stay there. Now, again, kind of awkward after all this stuff and all this noise if Lane Kiffin just comes out and goes, I'm staying in Oxford. But I know Brando's daughter went to Ole Miss, so maybe got some connections there, and we'll see. Again, everybody's convinced. Like, talk to some Ole Miss people, think he's staying. Talk to some Florida people, think he's coming. Talk to some LSU people, think he's coming. So he can't be in 3 places at once next year. So certainly we'll continue to track all that. And we'll talk with Graham Hall coming up next of 24/7 Sports to get the angle of the Florida side and, do they think he's coming and what percentage chance. So let's get to some other tidbit news around the conference. How about Arkansas? An investigation into an interim coordinator's altercation with a player. On Monday, Bobby Petrino addressed a report that interim defensive coordinator Chris Wilson had an interaction with a Razorback player. According to CBS Sports, there was a report in mid-October, Chris Wilson struck a player in the face and left him with a bloody lip. Allegedly occurred when the 56-year-old Wilson called the player an expletive in the locker room. After the player asked to whom he was speaking, Wilson doubled down. The two sides then squared up, seemingly as a joke. Multiple sources say Wilson swung at least once. Another one saying Wilson swung twice, connecting with the player's face. Player sought Wilson out elsewhere in the football facility, a source said, to gain an understanding of what happened. Wilson told the player he had just been messing around. Hummer writes that CBS elected to protect the player's anonymity due to the nature of the incident. Arkansas investigated the situation and concluded that both were joking around. So Arkansas telling CBS in a statement, our athletic department looked into this. Conversations revealed they were joking around. So look, stories like this come out when you got an interim coach kind of handling things, and you want to keep control of the locker room and news that leaks out. Speaking of Arkansas, Alabama defense coordinator Kane Womack, his name being thrown out there as a rumor for the Arkansas job, among other names like former Northwestern coach Pat Fitzgerald, Memphis's Ryan Silverfield, North Texas's Eric Morris, South Florida's Alex Golish. Pete Thamel linked Kane Womack to the Razorback job last week. Womack asked about it on Monday, said, I appreciate the question, but I'm not going to address any job opportunity stuff. So Womack in his second season as Alabama's DC. Alabama's defense having quite a year this year. So we'll see if he is a finalist for that Arkansas job. Over at also at Alabama, on the offensive side, Kane Womack, or rather Kalen DeBoer, and his relationship with his offensive coordinator, Ryan Grubb, has turned out to be a good one. Obviously, Ryan Grubb has brought some great offensive pieces to this team this year. Ty Simpson in the running for the Heisman race and much more. According to ESPN's Adam Rittenberg, he believes Ryan Grubb is one of the top early candidates for the head coaching job that is open at Cal. So he said Grubb has been alongside DeBoer at several spots, including Washington, where he served as OC in 23 when they got to the national championship. Then he spent 24 as the Seahawks OC before rejoining Grubb or DeBoer in Alabama this year. Grubb, 49 years old, could be in the running for that Cal job. So keep an eye on that. Man, that'd be crazy if DeBoer were to lose both coordinators this offseason, the head coaching jobs. All right, in other news going on around the conference, over at LSU, they are looking into their quarterback situation. Michael Van Buren, is he going to start at Oklahoma this weekend? Will they go back to Garrett Nussmeier? Some reports out there saying that it's likely going to be Van Buren again. Matt Zenitz of CBS Sports reporting LSU likely to start Michael Van Buren again at Oklahoma. Frank Wilson asked about it yesterday, and he said, they're going to try Nussmeier at practice this week, but would not expect him to likely to be the guy there in Norman. And how about SEC Players of the Week? Diego Pavia named one of the SEC Players of the Week for Week 13. He was outstanding last week. 6 touchdowns, 532 total yards in the win over Kentucky. Oklahoma defensive lineman Taylor Wine and Martell Height, they shared the conference's Defensive Player of the Week honors. Height had 2 picks in the win over Kentucky. Wine had 2 tackles for a loss and 1.5 sacks in Oklahoma's win over Mizzou. Meanwhile, Auburn freshman quarterback Deuce Knight, he earned the SEC's Freshman of the Week award for his performance against Mercer. So all worthy winners there of SEC Players of the Week honors. All right, thank you guys for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Coming up next, Graham Hall going to talk with us about Lane Kiffin and the Florida job. How likely is that to happen? We're going to talk about that next, right here, Locked on SEC. And first, I want to remind you guys this holiday week, make sure if you have not checked out our friends at FanDuel, you do so, because we got action every night. You got the NBA in full swing. And by the way, FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA, they got action just about every night. Of course, we got a lot of college football action. We got pro football action happening on Thanksgiving. Tons of stuff happening this week. And look, it's frankly going to just keep every game exciting when you play on FanDuel, especially when you got a rooting interest, whether it's your fan or something you have bet on. And right now, FanDuel, they are giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. All you got to do is head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel. Like we said, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And a lot of those SEC games up there. We got a triple header in the SEC on Friday. You got the Egg Bowl. You think Mississippi State can pull off the upset? You can get good odds on them straight up as the underdog. How about Georgia Tech to take it to Georgia? You can get in on that. Or if you like Texas, to pull off the home upset of Texas A&M. All that right there for you at FanDuel.com. Like we said, new customers get those $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Get signed up at FanDuel.com. Right along here, Locked On SEC. We've been talking all about Lane Kiffin. I get it. Everybody's tired of it. We're ready to move on. We hope a decision comes very soon. But we're talking a lot on the Ole Miss side, the LSU side. We have yet to talk the Florida side of things. So join us now to talk a little bit about the Florida Gators perspective with their head coaching search. Is our buddy Graham Hall covering the Florida Gators for 24/7 Sports. Graham, welcome in, man.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, especially this is a fascinating time right now with I always say November is my favorite month of the year with football, basketball. You got fall baseball that just ended. And that's never been more true than when you have a coaching search on top of that. So it's a great time here and love to talk it all over with you guys, especially.
It is crazy, too. I was going back through my DMs and I saw last we had you on the show was 2020, like the COVID year. So
I didn't have this hair, man. I didn't have this hair. I must have been bald. So I must have looked a little bit different.
Yeah, a lot has changed. I think we had like 100 subscribers back then. The channel's blown up and grown since then. But a lot has changed, too, because, we think back to those head coaching searches in 21 when, LSU was open and they were looking at, they didn't want to touch Billy Napier. And Florida came in and grabbed Billy Napier. And, we thought that was a good hire. We thought LSU hiring Brian Kelly was a good hire. And it's so funny how things could change years later. And you look back and go, no, it wasn't. So, let's start a little bit with the Lane Kiffin stuff because as we've heard the last week, a lot of momentum building towards LSU. Where does Florida stand in the Lane Kiffin sweepstakes?
Well, everything I've heard from Florida's side, I've talked to boosters, I've talked to people within the athletic department off the record, I've talked to some recruits of what they've been told. Florida has done a really good job, and this isn't just me blowing smoke up, their ass to preserve connections and stuff like that, but they've done a good job at keeping things out of the public eye. There have been some ways that they've tried to manage the narrative through, I don't want to say use the media, but kind of steered the narrative in a sense here. And they really have tried to keep things very private. And that can make it a little bit difficult to get a read on what their candidate board looks like, how confident they feel in landing a guy like Lane Kiffin, or maybe pivoting to someone like John Summerall or a Lincoln Riley or a Jeff Brohm or one of those top coordinators out there like a Will Stein or a Glenn Schumann. But from tracking Florida's moves and everything I've heard internally, Florida still feels very confident in landing Lane Kiffin. I've said that repeatedly for the past couple of weeks. And even before you saw this increase in, I don't even want to say overconfidence, but kind of like chest beating coming from the LSU side. And that may prove to be correct because when you have two sides who look extremely confident, who feel extremely confident, one of them are going to look crazy or misplaced or ill-informed, whatever you want to call it. And that's what has made this situation so fascinating is both LSU side in Baton Rouge, from media, from fans to former players, feel really good at LSU, but you look at the same thing happening in Gainesville. You haven't seen this shift in narrative or any panic whatsoever from Florida's side. So they remain convinced from everyone I've talked to that Lane Kiffin remains the top option for Florida, an ideal candidate. And more than likely, in a lot of people's opinion, the next head coach at the University of Florida. Now, will that come to fruition? These next 5 days are going to be riveting, quite frankly. We're going to be following flight trackers, looking at what information comes out there at a national perspective, because let me just be completely clear. ADs and officials both at LSU, Florida, and Ole Miss, they do use the national media to kind of steer the conversation and get information out there. And while as a local guy, that can kind of be a little bit frustrating, it does give a good read at what Florida or LSU or Ole Miss, where they're leaning, how they're feeling, and how much they are looking to use the national media to either get information out or steer the narrative. And it's been quite interesting to see how that has been used here in this process. I think, honestly, one of the things that many people are maybe underestimating is that how much is going to probably come out about this coaching search in the aftermath of whatever decision happens. Everything that went on behind the scenes, once there's not, search firms involved and someone has made their decision, you're going to see, I think, a lot about how these programs moved in silence and what they were navigating and how they were meeting. That stuff is going to be fascinating to read here. So everything I said, everything I've heard about Florida and Lane Kiffin makes me think that Florida is still very confident, but LSU is confident, and someone is going to look like, that their overconfidence was misplaced.
At this point, Graham, just based off the comment or the statement released from the AD, Keith Carter, on Friday, Lane at the podium on Monday, kind of sidestepping every question about his future. At this point, I mean, does it feel like there's very little chance he goes back to Ole Miss? Like, does it feel like that option is off the table kind of at this point?
I guess I can't say off the table, because Lane Kiffin is someone who, it's well documented, he changes his mind a good bit. And there's a lot for him in Oxford. I know that some people sit here and say, well, you cover Florida, talk about everything that's great at Florida. Let's be quite honest. I mean, he's got his family up there. He has everything he wants at Ole Miss. And maybe those are factors where he's going to, who knows, maybe tonight or tomorrow night, where he's going to sit here and be like, man, maybe the grass isn't greener in Baton Rouge or Gainesville. Who's to say? I don't know. But I do look at the fact that he could have signed an extension weeks ago. They would have paid him whatever he wanted. They could have paid him $15 million, and he still would have had, the Sprinter vans after practice to go to hot yoga. He would have the privacy in Oxford that he may not have in Baton Rouge or Gainesville, where he's able to live his life. And he's probably the most famous and well-liked man in Oxford, Mississippi. He could change his mind. I can't rule that out whatsoever, but it does feel like the frustrations have built up to this point that he hasn't committed to Ole Miss beyond this season, that it's impacting the players. We're hearing that players are growing frustrated with a lack of commitment, that this distraction has overshadowed the monumental accomplishments that they've had up there in Oxford, where they are in contention to not just make the college football playoff, but potentially get a first-round bye and host a playoff game in Oxford, Mississippi, which is, 8 figures to the local community. It's paying back the businesses that have invested in the roster building, that have, bought in and helped fund this roster when they weren't having this level of success. This is a massive weekend, massive stakes for them. And the fact that Lane Kiffin's future, even while he's under, contract at Ole Miss, has overshadowed that, there's a lot of frustration there in my mind. But if he changed his mind tonight, tomorrow, whenever it is, Saturday morning, they would welcome him back in a heartbeat, and all would be forgiven. They would see it as a sign that they beat 2 programs to keeping him at their program that, frankly, have had more success this century than Ole Miss has had by a large margin. Honestly, LSU was, they won a national championship a few years ago. Florida, obviously, their run with Urban Meyer and what Steve Spurrier did. This is a situation where if he stays at Ole Miss, they would probably have a little bit of residual angst, and you really put us through it here before you made a recommitment. But they would welcome him back, absolutely. So I can't rule out definitively that he's not staying at Ole Miss. But everything that has happened, from the distractions, the lack of a commitment beyond this year, some of just his moves, having his family go to Gainesville, having his family go to Baton Rouge to, look at real estate reportedly, that has rubbed people the wrong way and has signaled that he's looking at his next stop. So again, I can't rule it out, but everything that we've seen that has come out publicly is trending towards a separation between Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin.
We're talking with Graham Hall, of course, covering the Florida Gators for 24/7 Sports. Graham, what is Florida's pitch? Because I've heard LSU, they've said we're going to pay them all this money. We're going to give them all, this NIL money. And then I heard, well, Florida can do all that too and all this. So, I'll put it this way. I've heard some LSU people say, well, Florida had the Spurrier era and the Urban Meyer era. And outside of that, it's been a lot of down. Prior to Brian Kelly, the three previous coaches at LSU all won championships. So people look at it, well, if Les Miles and Ed Ogeron can win a championship there, well, anybody can win a championship. So what's the pitch? Like if he's hearing the pitch from LSU and that's their pitch, what's the pitch from the Florida side?
I think there are some of the personal connections that have been used in the pitch. Obviously, he idolizes Steve Spurrier, a chance to be around Steve Spurrier, someone he grew up and has modeled his fashion after with, visors, to be right there and be a resource that he can reach out to, even though, Steve's in his 80s now. He's right there in Gainesville. He's heavily involved. He's got an office in Ben Hill Griffin Stadium. That's, I think, a connection. Obviously, his ties to how he met his ex-wife, Layla, his son's affinity for the Florida football program. There's been some photos that have come out of, Knox as a young kid wearing Florida gear while his dad was the head coach at Ole Miss. So I think there's the personal connections there as well. I do think that there are certainly some concerns that he would have about the Florida football program. Not to pivot away from your initial question, but he knows Jim McElwain. He knows Dan Mullen. He certainly knows Billy Napier. He's aware of Will Muschamp. He's coached against him, certainly. And if I'm Lane Kiffin, I'm probably sitting there and looking at Florida's administration and saying, why didn't it work out for these guys? What would be different for me? And I think there are a couple things that Florida could point to. The NIL infrastructure has been set up at Florida. There was certainly the turbulent patch. A lot of coaches struggled to deal with it when it first got underway here. Florida had the very public, issue of the Jaden Rashada saga, but that's long gone in a sense, even if there's still some court things hanging in here. I do think that it's in a place now where you saw that story come out about the $25 million annual investment for the roster. Florida boosters are willing to donate at a rate whatever Lane Kiffin needs to be successful at Florida. I think part of the pitch also is that he would be in one of the most talent-rich states in the country. I think if the Texas job was open, you could make the argument that they are in a very similar, if not a better situation in terms of landing high school talent. Lane Kiffin, no offense to the state of Mississippi, has a tough time recruiting in Mississippi because not only are you in a place that doesn't have a ton of blue chip prospects, but the ones that you are after, you're in a proximity to a lot of Big Ten schools where you're not just competing for the SEC with the SEC, but you're also competing with all the Big Ten powers, the Ohio States and the Michigans. So coming to the state of Florida, even having Georgia, Alabama, Florida State, Miami, UCF, USF, all these programs around here that you're competing for talent, you have one of the top three states of blue chip prospects in the country. I think that's part of the pitch. And he could still be as reliant on the transfer portal as he has been at Ole Miss. So I think that aspect right there would be something that he would consider. But it's also a chance to be a legend. And on a national scale, yeah, if he wins a championship in Oxford, they're going to build statues of him. But he has a chance to be, if he wins a championship at Florida, have his name alongside not just Steve Spurrier and Urban Meyer, but he would be in the same breath as Ryan Day, as Nick Saban. If he continues to coach at the rate that he is at, just at 50 years old, look at where Nick Saban was where he was 50. He was hardly considered the legendary head coach that he is today. So I think that's part of it, the national profile, the University of Florida investment, the Florida brand, everything that we just talked about, playing in front of 20,000 more fans than he does in Oxford at a legendary venue like Ben Hill Griffin Stadium. I think all of that is part of the pitch. But again, if I'm Lane Kiffin, I definitely have some questions about what would be different for me than the previous coaches at Florida, really the last 15 years at Florida. And the answer might be as simple as you're a better head coach than all the guys that we just mentioned there. And I think Lane Kiffin, given his confidence level, could probably answer that and be like, yeah, you're right. I am.
Well, let's jump into this, Graham. If it's not Lane Kiffin, who are the next top names you think that Florida will be targeting? And as we've heard, they have, one of the reports was they've cast a wide net. So, they are covering their bases if they do get a no from Lane. Who are some of those next top names?
Yeah, I will say Florida has had part of the Lane Kiffin intrigue here, and I haven't seen this talked about so much, which I think is quite fascinating. And I just want to throw this out here, is that if Florida has targeted Lane Kiffin as their number one option, and say they don't land him, it will be a significant, I hate to call it a failure, because you talked about Billy Napier at the beginning of this, and head coaching hires are kind of like recruits, where you land the 5-star or the name that everyone's talking about and everyone praises it as a great hire. Well, let's see how it pans out, right? You could hire a coordinator and they could be fantastic, compare them to a 2-star or an unranked prospect. People didn't see that as a win at the time, but in 4 years later, that could look like a fantastic evaluation and a fantastic decision. So let's see how it all plays out first off. But from a objective standpoint in securing what you've looked to do, Florida has had more time to land Lane Kiffin than any other program out there, because it's not just the 2 weeks advance of the parting ways with Billy Napier compared to the Brian Kelly parting of ways. The Billy Napier hot seat conversation has been ongoing since 2023. Through 2024, a firing looked like it was going to happen. Lane Kiffin was emerged as an ideal candidate a year ago. I mean, you could make the case that they've had 18 months to figure this thing out, more time than anyone else. So no one really wants to talk contingency plans, but everything you just said, Florida's had to do its due diligence for more than a year here. And I do think that the market is quite interesting. Lincoln Riley is only, 43 years old. Lane Kiffin's 50, and we've been talking about Lincoln Riley as a head coach for a decade now. You're looking at a coach that probably still has his best coaching in front of him. So I think Lincoln Riley is a really intriguing name. Now, where does he stand on Florida's board? I can't tell you. I do think names like Jeff Brohm, or you look at the coordinators, Will Stein, Glenn Schumann, and then you also look at a guy like Brent Key, who is in the midst of his most successful season at Georgia Tech. But you look at his record at Georgia Tech the previous couple of years, he went 4-4, and when he took over, and then went 7-6, 7-6. I mean, that's very similar to Billy Napier. And now he's 9-2 right now, but he's coming off of quite a little bit of an embarrassing loss, right? So maybe the sample size isn't large enough to think that, you're going to be a great fit at the University of Florida. But you talk about two guys in Brohm and Brent Key who are coaching at their alma maters. How intrigued would they be in having a chance, giving up a chance to be a legend, to be a coach that people talk about at their program, build a statue of for the next 20, 30 years, to come to Florida and maybe have similar results to Billy Napier or Dan Mullen or Jim McElwain? It's a good question. I do think that the board after Florida gets really intriguing, but I do think, and this is not just solely based on my gut, it's based off of some things I've heard. I think Jeff Brohm as the number 2 behind Lane Kiffin, and I do think there's a gap between 1 and 2 in terms of security in how sound of a hire it would be in Florida's eyes. I think Brohm is in that mix of 2, 3 with Key and Lincoln Riley. Now, again, I can't say exactly what Florida's board looks like, but I have heard from people that Florida has vetted Jeff Brohm and feels like he is going to be a coach that is going to be extremely successful for the next decade, whether it's at Louisville or whether he heads to another program. So no one, again, wants to talk contingency plans or think about contingency plans right now outside of Lane Kiffin in Gainesville, but the board after him is definitely worth talking about, and it has some intriguing names on there who I think are worth rolling the dice on if you are Florida and seeing if they could be someone who could lead you to the college football playoff and get you to the mountaintop for the first time at Florida.
And the difference with Brohm and Key, too, is they've shown it in the ACC, a little bit different from Sun Belt competition as far as coaching your guys up. Real quick on that front, Eli Drinkwitz, is his name kind of off the board for Florida?
I don't know if I could say it's off the board for Florida, but from what I've heard, Florida has vetted him and an opinion emerged. I can't say exactly from who, that Florida believed that the fan base would not well receive Eli Drinkwitz being the next head coach, whether it was something that happened in a conversation or an interview, or maybe needing to see a little bit larger sample size from him, because I do think that there's a quiet belief, not in Gainesville, or it could be in Gainesville, but this isn't just solely emerging from Gainesville is what I'm saying, that let's see how Drinkwitz does the next couple of years. He hired Kirby Moore, who was the offensive coordinator with Kalen DeBoer at Fresno State. Kirby Moore is going to get a head coaching job, whether it's this cycle, next year, whenever, but his contract is up, I believe, from what I've read, at Missouri at the end of the year. And if he's not back in Columbia, Missouri next year, let's see how much Drinkwitz is able to do without Kirby Moore. Because since Moore has been there, they've had really successful seasons the past 2 years. I know this year they've had a couple losses that have knocked them out of being in that contention for the college football playoff. But let's see how Drinkwitz does without Kirby Moore, and with the schedule having a little bit more parity the next couple of years due to the schedule changes that are happening within the SEC. I've kind of used Missouri, as I hate to say that I was taking shots at Missouri, but I have said, hey, look, give Billy Napier Missouri's schedule this year, and they probably are playing in a bowl. They're probably going 8-4. I mean, you look at Missouri's schedule, they've had a couple tough games. Yeah, they've played Oklahoma and South Carolina, but really haven't played it in Alabama and haven't played a ton of top teams. I mean, they have had a very favorable schedule compared to Florida that played, a daunting SEC schedule, along with Miami, Florida State, and a USF team, which very well could make the college football playoff. We'll see what happens here, but a team that was really good. You're talking 11 games right there against really, really formidable foes. That isn't what Missouri's done. So there's going to be more parity in the next couple of years, and let's see how Drinkwitz does. If he is successful the next 2 years, then you are going to continue to see people talk about him as a coach that is going to be in conversations or floated as a name to be one of the next coaches at one of these illustrious programs out here.
Lastly for you, Graham, and I appreciate your time, man. I know we've kept you way longer than maybe expected.
My pleasure, man.
Is the first order of business for whether it's Lane Kiffin or whoever takes over, is the first order of business retaining DJ Lagway and some of this elite talent that's kind of on the roster?
I think elite talent, retaining them is certainly a priority. I think you look at guys like Jaden Baugh, Miles Graham, Dallas Wilson, Vernell Brown III. There are a ton of underclassmen at Florida that I think the Gators are going to want to keep regardless of who the next head coach is. The other factor is with a guy like Lane Kiffin, you're not just getting a head coach. You're getting a coach that is probably going to do a really good job at bringing the talented players with him, whether it's Kawan Lacey, Austin Simmons, a guy who was formerly committed to Florida. He may want to bring Simmons with him rather than, roll the dice on DJ Lagway. Lagway hasn't had a great year. Simmons obviously got replaced after being injured there for Trinidad Chambliss. Maybe Lane Kiffin wants to go with a guy that he's familiar with rather than roll the dice on DJ Lagway. Or maybe he tries to have both on the roster. I do think that Lagway is going to have a lot of better years ahead of him. This year has just not gone according to plan. He needs to get healthy. He needs to continue working on his technique and fundamentals. And he still has a massively high ceiling in my mind. But anytime you bring in a new head coach who has had success and has developed quarterbacks well, even under-recruited guys like Chambliss, you never know if they're going to want to retain the quarterback that was already there. And then you have to kind of maybe, and I'm not saying this about Lagway, but in general, you have the belief that maybe you have to get rid of some bad habits, or you have a player that is going to have to adjust to your style of coaching rather than bring in a player that knows how you coach, knows what to expect. I do think that is part of the equation here, is how much is, if you hire another coach from the SEC, are they going to look to bring in their former players? Do they look at a lot of the roster and say, this is top tier talent, let's retain them, bring in who we need to, use the portal well? Whether Lagway is included in that conversation as one of the key guys to retain, I think remains to be seen. But I do certainly believe that he is going to have a long career ahead of him. It just hasn't been the year that he desired, that Florida desired, the fan base desired. And it's just kind of led to the results that you've seen this year, where Florida's, sitting here at 3-8, hoping that all they have to play for is knock FSU out of bowl eligibility.
Graham, on the way out, people are watching this Tuesday morning. We won't get a decision till probably Saturday, but Give me your gut feeling. If I asked you to put a percentage on it that Lane Kiffin is the Florida head coach, are you 50%? Are you?
Yeah, I'm a little above 50%. I mean, everything I've heard, and I could be one of those people like I talked about who looks foolish here, who was led astray, that all the confidence that's been expressed to me, what I've seen and heard, and from the discussions, again, dating back more than a couple months, I could have to come back to the people I've talked to and been like, wow, you guys were led astray. And then you led me astray. But everything I've heard, I'm going to protect myself a little bit here. I'm not going to say, 85%, but I'm a little bit around 65. I said 70% a couple weeks ago. I'm still around 65%. The LSU confidence, if I had something legitimate that I could base that off of, not just like, we're hearing from our boosters, they're confident, I would maybe have waned a little bit. But everything I've heard still makes me feel really confident. And really, I mean, by about 65%, maybe I should be safe and say, 50-50. It's a coin flip here. Who knows what's going to happen? Maybe I have to factor in everything I talked about. Lane Kiffin could change his mind. He could change his mind Tuesday morning when this drops. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this all shakes out. I'm still confident in Florida's chances, but I'm hardly sitting here saying, 90% is happening, barring a complete collapse. That's not what I've heard. I'm going to go 65% to protect myself. And if I'm wrong, then I can say, well, I said 35% chance it wouldn't happen, man.
Yeah, but my theory is he told LSU and Florida, I'm coming, and he's just going to make a decision this week where he's going. So we'll see what happens. Certainly going to be crazy. He is Graham Hall. Let everybody know where they can find your stuff, man.
Yeah, Swamp 247. Read me over there. We got podcasts, coaching search, hot boards, basketball coverage, you name it. We got it over there. Come join the conversation. Talk about Florida. Talk about other fan bases. Whatever you want. When you're listening to this Tuesday, we'll have just started our week-long Black Friday promo. It's the best deal we do all year, 75% off an annual subscription. After the promo deal, you get Paramount and Plus if you renew at the full price, which is like a $80-something deal per year. It's hard to beat it out there. And man, this is always a good time. We got to do it again soon. Talk to whoever the coach is at Florida and look at the aftermath of what all occurred.
Yeah, sooner than every 5 years. I mean, 2030, we'll get you.
I could have a mohawk, man. We don't know what I'm going to look like in a couple years. I could have gray hairs in my beard more than I got right now. So we got to do it while I still have this fantastic flow.
Graham Hall, appreciate the time, man.
Always a pleasure. Mine for sure, man. We got to do it again soon.
All right, thanks again to Graham Hall. Thank you guys for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. And hey, a reminder, if you live in Mississippi, Alabama, or Louisiana, you can check us out on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network, airing daily weekdays, 11:30 a.m. Central, home of the New Orleans Pelicans and home of Locked On SEC. I'm Chris Gordy. This has been Locked On SEC. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Come on back and see us.